Hello, everybody. I'm Ryan O'Halloran with Imbalance IT, and today we're unpacking one of the biggest developments in cybersecurity this year, the rise of AI-enabled attacks. We'll talk about why this matters to CIOs and CISOs, how attackers are accelerating parts of the kill chain with automation, and what security leaders should be thinking about next. Joining with me, I have my special guest, Shane Harsch from SentinelOne, here to share perspective on how machine speed attacks change the landscape and what modern defense looks like. Shane, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank
Should
you,
we
Ryan, for having me. Very excited to be here.
really appreciate it? Why don't we start off with one of the common AI disclosures of the attacks that had happened recently, looking at Anthropic, for instance. What aspects of that stood out for you?
Well, I mean, the biggest aspect is that it's the first large scale AI orchestrated cyber espionage, campaign. So this is really, honestly, the first of what is likely to be many, and the completeness of the execution from start to finish, all the different components. What we saw is really a true automation of what had been largely a manual operation for that state sponsored actor, right? And that's truly the most significant part of it, that you only had humans involved at very critical decision points along the campaign cycle, and the rest of it was fully automated, including automated analysis of the response to particular stages of the attack. And the completeness and effectiveness of this as essentially a proof of concept, if we really want to accept it as that. And that's kind of how, I suggest that we all look at this. Could this have been worse? Could this have caused a greater amount of damage or harvested more information? The potential is certainly there. And this is a really good proof of concept for that state sponsored actor to figure out how are they going to do this, what failed, what worked well, what could be optimized, what could be made more efficient, what doesn't need to change at all, right? So I find the state of the industry to be really interesting. There's this assumption that AI is a done deal, that, oh, of course we know how to leverage it, when in reality, all of it, every aspect of the technology, its adoption, its implementation, its utilization, all of those things, process and people and the technology itself, all of those different levels are new. So that's, I think, what's most impressive about this is that, this is a major first run out of the gate. It has definitely been successful. The scale of it is unparalleled in the history of these types of attacks,
And nearly touchless, like you said, which
and
is
nearly touchless. Yeah, just like
amazing.
if yeah, if we imagine that instead of one team orchestrating this, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of teams orchestrating, this same type of process. That's a
Yeah,
very frightening prospect.
yeah, it's an eye opener of what's to
Mhm.
come. I hear you. I mean, Shane, if parts of these attacks can be automated or now fully automated, that obviously changes the pieces that are manual for enterprise defenders. Even the pieces that they've automated already might not be enough. How does that change their livelihood?
Yeah, I mean the interesting thing, and you've actually seen these trends. Like if you look at the Verizon breach report or Mandiant report, anything like that, what you've noticed is that the amount of dwell time that attackers are enjoying, if I use that term appropriately, has significantly reduced over the past 10 years. Like where we went from almost a year of dwell time down to measured in days is a reflection of the success that we've had in the security industry. SentinelOne being a part of that, but all of the vendors, all of the
Yeah,
solutions that are out
there
there.
used there used to be more persistence, and now it's like get in, get out.
Right. So the response to that, like we have to think, okay, well, those attackers and the attack methodologies no longer have the luxury of time, whereas they did before. And that is forcing them to accelerate every aspect of that process. And by adopting AI, they're able to do that. So we're going to see, you know, massive amounts of time compression on your typical recon, exploitation, lateral movement stages of the attack. So if that's dropping down to literally minutes, what does that mean to a incident response process or a security operations standard of procedures? What does that mean when you're trying to respond within a time window that's measured in minutes? And that is those teams aren't built for that, right? We haven't been building for that. Many teams that have formed, the majority of them have formed within the past 10 years. I even look at, the maturity journey that I saw at my time at RSA post the RSA breach in 2011, and you see the radical transformation of a highly mature SOC in response to that breach and trying to get down like their standard operating time to be down to 24 hours to complete a complete investigation cycle, and that being industry leading at the time. That's no longer acceptable, right? 24 hours is too long. 1
Yeah.
hour is even stretching it, right? And the only way you can get there is on that automated response. So it fundamentally changes what it means to run a SOC. It fundamentally changes how you architect identity. It makes assumptions about levels of visibility and automation that many organizations, to a certain extent, have been dreaming about. Yeah, they know they need to do it, but getting the budget, having the staff, having the vision, understanding how it all comes together. Like we are now drifting well outside, I would say, the majority of security operations managers' comfort zones as to what the operation should look like.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And to your point, the breakout time moving laterally from the time of intrusion, even
Mm-hmm.
earlier this year was somewhere under an hour, 51 minutes, something like that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the latest I've heard recently, on average, not the quickest, 18 minutes.
Yeah.
Your tools are still reacting in some cases to this while this is already going on. So it's to your point, you have no time and you have to figure out how can I hyper automate what I have. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it just no longer is an option. It's status quo. It's where we're at,
Yeah.
you know.
Absolutely.
And I think the nature of AI threats and attacks, and also how it can supercharge, if you will, a lot of the attackers that are maybe less skilled is also a
Mm-hmm.
major concern in my mind. Now you have less skilled attackers that are able to get access to more advanced things. They're able to create malware using AI. There's a lot of misunderstandings, I think, in that area about why the contact frequency of these individuals is going to increase, which will inflate the risk. Can you tell us a little bit about what you see most misunderstood about AI in the hands of the adversaries out there?
We understand the models that we've been chasing and building and refining for the last 10, 20, 30 years. And the reality is that we're facing different models, right? We're facing fundamentally different operational modes, both in terms of attack and ultimately how we need to defend these environments. We have to have an assumption of compromise, and I think that's a term that's generally been used, is to assume that you're compromised, and that ultimately drives conversations around zero trust and all those other aspects of an assumed compromised position. But that is fundamentally like I guess the leeway that maybe some companies have had with whether they're going to adopt zero trust technologies or an assumed compromised position, right? That time has passed, right? There's no longer the luxury of trying to figure out what your team is going to do. Fundamentally, the protections that have been built into the AI platforms are insufficient, right? Guardrails are not a wall. We have to assume that even the foremost models from the foremost AI companies are potentially easily subvertible with, creative prompt injection or some of the other creative techniques that we saw here in the Anthropic demonstration. And that's, I encourage everyone to read that article in depth and to understand, what has fundamentally changed about the nature of the attacks. But it's the speed, it's the scale, and it's the fundamentally the lack of expertise that's required, right? The barrier to entry for a large scale attack has been all but eliminated, right? Especially if publicly available models are being leveraged for these attacks. Like, it's one thing to imagine some, Bond villain-esque, mountain retreat that's got its own data center
Right.
running its own AI, launching an attack. Okay,
In a
yeah,
bunker
great.
somewhere.
Yeah, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about attackers leveraging commodity platforms that are openly available out there. And by and large, leveraging commodity data solutions, hosting solutions, whether it's AWS or Azure or what have you. So every surface is an attack surface. Every surface is a potentially attacker, right? And how we architect our security, how we architect and build our operations in response to that is fundamentally different. I mean, it's kind of like, well, you've built a house, but you're storing gasoline and dynamite all over the place while you're living there, right? What are you going to do to contain all that potentially flammable and explosive type information, eh, assuming that you have to have regular traffic coming through that
Right.
space, right?
Yeah.
Um, so it's a very different approach to security than what has been possible before.
Yeah. And speaking of modernized architecture, we're in a situation now too where automation means different things to different people with different budgets and different resources, right? The investments they've made. So they're trying to get there, knowing that they need to prioritize certain things to be able to bring down this response time, right? This time to remediate. In your mind, what capabilities around automation are the most important to be able to shift your defenses as far in the early stages of the kill chain as possible?
Well, fundamentally, you have to detect at machine speed. Like that's all there is to it, right? There is no, hey, we're going to review the logs, or even we're going to have an automated
Right.
review of the logs, right? That's fine for, truly novel anomaly detection. Like, that's going to be the only way that you can do it. But what you want to focus on are behaviors, known risky behaviors that are occurring at the moment they're occurring, right? So this means you're doing machine speed detection, and essentially you are racing against that machine speed attack and, keeping pace with it, going, all right, oh, yep, it's bad, right? And at some point you make the determination this is no longer legitimate. This is now an actual malicious attack. And that's happening at that machine speed, which then assumes that you have some level of enhanced, if not near perfect, visibility to all of those activities, whether it's network activity, process activity, memory activity, doesn't matter, right? Whatever the activity is, however anomalous it is, being able to evaluate that activity in the proper context to know that this is bad, and fundamentally, it needs to be an AI that is also doing that. So your traditional signature driven type detections, whether it's, network based IDS or host based antivirus, it doesn't matter. Those signature driven or known bad detections are already out of date, right? So is that going to help you catch commodity? Yes. Is that going to help you catch novel? No. So if we know that you are potentially subject to novel attacks, and there's no reason to assume that you aren't, and we know that AI can help generate these novel attacks faster than the humans that were determining what these novel techniques were, and then those novel attacks are being executed at machine speed with AI automation behind it, the only possible response is to leverage the same level of automation and intelligence within your detection. So that means robust threat intelligence. That means robust collection of multiple types of data that represent that process, memory, and network activity that we're concerned about, and fundamentally identity, right? Abuse of identity, usage of identity, all of those pieces, all of the fundamental pieces. We have to be able to analyze those in real time for questionable behaviors and recognize them in the context of potentially questionable patterns, right, of adversarial activity. And that is a very different architecture than what most organizations have been building over the past 10 years.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the concept around the blind spots in the visibility because identities, I think, are one of those cavities,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And more often than not, attackers are socially engineering, bypassing the AV, right? Logging in legitimately, and then you need to be prepared to do a couple of things. Understand what they did,
Mm-hmm.
be able to respond to that specifically. And then in some cases, things are so toxic that you may need to not only recover, but rebuild your
Mm-hmm.
entire identity store. And that plays into the work recovery time of what it takes to recover from a cyber event, very much so that you didn't plan for in your disaster recovery event. And I think thinking about identity that same way you used to think about your systems, your workloads, your data, protecting them before and during, after an attack, also making them part of your recovery strategy couldn't be more important. Can you talk a little bit about how leaders should think about identity and endpoint now in kind of the same with the same common goals in mind? Like if you don't have visibility there and you don't know what happened if somebody logged in legitimately and your bells aren't ringing because the AV caught something, what do we do to protect ourselves before, after the attack?
Yeah, I mean, resiliency technologies are hypercritical for any number of reasons, right? Whether it's, your endpoint security provider operates and executes within the kernel, so that endpoint security provider could potentially cause its own outage, right? Or you have all these different technologies that are playing in different ways, right? There's any number of reasons why that endpoint could be taken offline. And so if we focus on the end user and resiliency on getting that user back to productivity, whatever that looks like, right? Whether it's a combination of creative browser technologies, creative applications, right? What I think we're starting to see is that there is kind of a fundamental shift and a reconsideration of, should every end user have a general purpose computing device, right? One of the challenges, the reasons that we face a lot of these security challenges is everyone is given a general purpose security device or a computing device, a laptop, a desktop, what have you, that can basically do anything, right? It could run its own AIs, right? We're already seeing proof of concepts where small language models, very purpose built LLMs, tailored, all of those different things. They're looking at small models that can be deployed by the malware itself. And now you have an autonomous AI agent that's running independently, executing its playbook. And that's so much of what we've looked at from a security perspective is built around human gated processes, right? User X goes and does this, and then they do this, and then they do this. The majority of identity traffic right now is all API traffic. Like it's all bot traffic. It's not human traffic. And so we can't just assume that there is this normal human gated process that's happening here. Most of it is actually fully automated transactions right now. So now we need to understand what is the pattern of those transactions? What are anomalous patterns? When have we seen this user do X, Y, and Z? And when they do this new activity, is that anomalous? Is that regular? Does it only happen in certain contexts? Which then goes all the way back to that general comprehensive visibility around process, memory, network, and user, and how those all work together, right? What is the usage
Harmony.
profile of that user across those different vectors? And then do anomaly detection there. And that is not something a human can do, right? A human can absolutely do that forensic analysis on a manual basis on a single endpoint, and that might take a number of hours even for an expert. And the reality is we have to do that level of analysis in real time, right? And that's just not possible, right? Another thing that I also see is, a lot of your security operations center workflows are built around use cases. Like, well, we know this is the particular type of attack going against this particular type of system. That's great
You're
when
not
you
going to,
can
yeah, when you
articulate
know
and
it.
enumerate that for the environment, but that no longer matters. Like the
Right.
ways that you're going to be attacked, you can't just automate specific use cases. You actually have to modularize your automation, which again, you're not going to do in a traditional SOAR-based Python-driven workflow, that has 100 steps that you've built out for this use case. You need 20 to 30 modular workflows that cover all possibilities, right? And that can make automated decisions on their own, right? There's a level of decision making that can be automated so that, much like the attackers in the Entropic situation, where they had 4 to 6 touch points on thousands and thousands of actions, the defenders need 4 to 6 human gated touch points on thousands and thousands of analytic actions and to make decisions in that way. And most organizations simply have not built that practice in that way.
Wow. Sounds like we got a lot of work ahead of us, which is always the case with cyber, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
really appreciated your expertise today. And I think kind of summing it up for listeners, there's three takeaways that I think I want to highlight. One, I think you hit on and couldn't be more correct about is that AI enabled attacks, the pace and the structure, human responses won't cut it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have a way to automate those investigations, those remediations, those containments. And if you don't have that, you need to focus on gaining that capability, not as a nice to have, as a need to have.
Correct.
The second one that I heard from you, I think that was really important, was around visibility, because visibility doesn't just mean that I know how my endpoints dashboard is doing and how many threats are on that dashboard. It means that I can correlate activities between what's happening on the endpoint and an individual and their identity and things like that. So when I understand what's abnormal, I can do something about it, even if I don't necessarily know exactly what that attack is, which I love the
Mm-hmm.
way you kind of talked about that. And then the last thing is around defense, right? The automation of the defense is essential, not optional. And I think also now, in response to some of these attacks, because they are so new and they are so fresh, right? We need to be prepared to do some threat hunting on demand when things do get through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if there's not an awareness of how I go about hunting down a threat that wasn't caught and I don't know what it is necessarily, that I'm prepared for that, that I have that resource. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to underscore this, what we've just walked through is fundamentally SentinelOne's vision, right? That is what we understand needs to happen. That's what we understand for the 14 plus million endpoints that we protect. We understand that this is how attacks have changed. And we believe that what we've built, what we continue to build, what we continue to refine is all built towards servicing that vision completely, right? We take that partner friendly open source approach. You can see a lot of the open source projects that we've just dropped in the last couple months in support of this. But then fundamentally, that represents the way that we are approaching and tackling this for our customers so that they don't have to build that in a vacuum, right? Protecting AI at the prompt level, protecting AI at the MCP level, protecting AI on the platform and looking for anomalous instances of standalone LLMs, right? That's a fundamental shift in how security is architected today. We know that, we get that, we're doing that. Centralizing that visibility, bringing that uniform modularized hyper automation to the platform, and making sure that teams and service providers, not just SentinelOne as a service provider, but all of our partners, our grander partner ecosystem of providers that are delivering those services to customers, have access to all of that information so they can make decisions in the time frame that's required for today's challenges.
Yeah, a concrete way we could fight AI with AI, the power of purple,
The
right?
power of
So
purple.
love it. So Shane, thank you so much for your time today. I want to wish you and our listeners out there a great rest of your week. Check out Imbalance and SentinelOne to help you defend yourself in a modern way. And if you're asking yourself out there, how can I accomplish some of these goals that were discussed? Reach out to us. We're here to help. Thank
Thank
you.
you.